The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Scoop webinar, and I do apologize for the delay. We have had a slight technical hitch. Okay, so today it's not Shannon, it's Andrea. I'm here with you today. Shannon will be joining us, and I just want to remind you of a few things before we get started. So these calls are recorded to listen to again at your availability on the NANP.org website. You can also earn 1 CEU credit for participating in Scoop webinars and taking the corresponding quiz that can be found in the membership area of the website. I would like to invite you also to share your hot educational topic with NANP. Are you doing great work in clinical research and applications? Have you started a business or non-profit? And would you like to share your experience? NANP wants to highlight all that speaks to our nutrition professional community. So email Shannon at shannon@nanp.org. So today's webinar will conclude with a Q&A session, so feel free to type in your questions throughout the webinar so we can get as many as possible. So without any more delay, let's get started. So I want to introduce Tamra Carr. She is an author, an educator, a researcher, and a clinician. Tamra has served as a nutrition education advisor to wellness programs and presented at local, regional, and national conferences and contributes to national board exams. Passionate about nutrition as the key to stopping many modern illnesses, and first authored Our Journey with Food in 2015 and subsequent second edition release dated April 19th, 2018 at the 13th annual conference in Monterey, California. She is an adjunct faculty at the Portland Community College Klein Center, where she shares her years of knowledge with her students in the Functional Stroke Holistic Nutrition Therapy program. Tamra, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrea. As always, it is a ball to do these webinars for NANP and for all of you listening. And this one in particular is going to be a lot of fun for me because I've gotten to tap a lot of the information that I've just put into the second edition that will be released at the conference. And, so there's a lot about history that we overlook because we're so focused on the science, all of the science, because we have to support everything we do with science. And this is my call to remind everybody that all current 21st century science is doing is validating much of the information we already knew from our historical use of foods. So we are going to look at some of how science is helping to support that for us in our practice as holistic nutritionists, as functional nutritionists. We can feel pretty confident about the recommendations we're making to clients based on the science as well as the tradition. So for those of you that have been to presentations that I've done before for NANP at the conference or webinars, I always begin with a disclaimer. There is no monetary or in-kind remuneration that I am receiving for doing this for NANP, just as a disclosure. And, if you're doing presentations, I encourage you to follow this protocol of always having a disclaimer. So let's look at the history and the role of food. And much of this is going to be a review for many of us that are so passionate about food. Many parts of the world look at food as a healing component, as medicine, not just simply nourishment or calories in, calories out equation for keeping us moving. Unfortunately, many of us who live in contemporary United States and probably Canada and Great Britain and Australia and New Zealand also, we've forgotten that vital role that nutrition, that food in particular, plays in keeping us healthy. We've gotten so engaged with the science and the technology that we are losing tradition, and we're losing that historical recounting of how foods have been used forever to keep us healthy. And since this is March, I'm going to refer to the Irish on more than one or two occasions because of St. Patrick's Day coming up. But there's some phenomenal foods that are part of the British, Great Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, tradition that even today they eat, but not like they used to. And, you know, since that's a population base that is experiencing many of the same kinds of health challenges that we are here in the United States with type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancers, it behooves us to remind those population bases as well as our own, because we're so intricately linked with them, that if we go back to regular foods, to our whole foods, and we talk to our clients about how they can incorporate these traditional foods into their diet, we can make some significant inroads, I believe, in improving people's health. So we have lost a lot of square footage of this country right now, also to huge mega farms. When I was a kid growing up in rural parts of Oregon, it wasn't uncommon for multi-generational family members to be living on a ranch or on a farm. But today in the Midwestern part of the United States, one corn or soybean farm may involve 16,000 square acres. That's about 25 square miles of landmass per farm. When in the 1950s, 60s, and even 70s, that might have been broken up into a multitude of farms. And now we have a monoculture that's going on. So our soils are being damaged, as well as the crops are having tons of chemicals applied to this. So that's a huge change that's taken place in the agricultural aspect of what we're talking to our clients about. So we spend a lot of time talking about Monsanto and Cargill, Eli Lilly, and how these companies are doing all of this genetic modification. But we need to remember that this isn't necessarily new, that the advent of using chemicals and monoculture agriculture has been going on for a long time. I have clients who grew up in the Midwest who told me about it was regular and routine for arsenic to be sprayed on the fields in the 1930s. So, you know, food adulteration and agricultural challenges have been going on much longer than just Monsanto and Cargill. But we are losing a vital step into our tradition because people aren't aware of what the tradition is with food any longer. And we're losing our traditional agricultural approaches to raising things. So when we look at native populations at seed banks, we're looking at there being thousands of varieties of vegetables, for example, that are currently being lost because of not passing forward our traditions. The role of women in agriculture and food is, you know, it's one of those things that we don't talk a lot with our clients, or maybe even think about as well. Women now are becoming more and more of a force in the agriculture world, and especially in organic farming. And we're looking at American farmlands currently are generating about $12.9 billion in annual revenue, which in the scope of things is relatively pretty small. We're only looking at about less than 5% of our farms are producing a lot of food for us. But we're seeing a change. We're seeing more people going back to using farmers markets, local sustainable markets. We currently have over 14,093 certified organic farms in the United States. So everything we're teaching our clients, talking to our students about, and sharing with people on the internet is making a difference. We are making a difference in the health of the population of our countries by sharing this information. You know, our average farmer only makes about $50,000 a year for gross income. So where is all of the money going? And that too is why it's so important for us as holistic nutritionists, integrative providers, to talk to our clients about supporting local economies, about buying from local food source providers. Because for every dollar spent on the market for eggs, for example, when you buy that through a local merchant or a local, particularly at a farmer's market, 85 cents of that stays within your community. Where when we buy from big stores, chain stores, Walmarts and Costco's, those kinds of places, the farmer is only on average getting about 25 cents out of every dollar. So that's a big difference in how we can impact our economies in our local areas by encouraging clients to buy from local food sources. As clinicians, I really encourage you to be vigilant about embracing trendy food choices, trendy health claims, trendy marketing, those kinds of things. Well, as clinicians and people running businesses, we have to be aware of market trends, but we also have, in my opinion, a responsibility to encourage our clients to not get sucked into the trends. Because one of the things that's become very apparent to me while I've been doing all the historical research for the second edition is that stepping into those trends, getting engulfed by the trends, is part of the reason why our clients and us as a nation have so many chronic health conditions, because of catchy catch slogans that say Kentucky Fried Chicken makes every day Mother's Day, or we all feel lucky when we drink mocha mint from General Mills International Coffees. Those kinds of things are playing, and the bright colors of advertising are very, very enticing. We all know this as clinicians, but every once in a while we need to be reminded to remind our clients that there is nothing that is going to be as satisfying, as nourishing, as nurturing, as spiritually gratifying as using real whole foods. So back to looking again at a little bit of the role of food when we're reminding our clients that our relationship with food is very deep. It goes back over a millennial. Our DNA now, through nutrigenomics and epigenetic studies, is really starting to illustrate how our cells carry the memories of our ancestors. There's research that has just shown that the trauma as well as the illnesses and toxins that a grandparent was exposed to has a profound effect on the health of a grandchild, and maybe even as far as a great grandchild. So there's a lot to be said about our cells carrying the memories of our ancestors. And there are over 10,000 chemicals that have not been that are not a normal part of nature that are currently in our environment. And it's important for us to talk to clients about how whole foods naturally help them to detoxify from these chemicals. Because one of the things we're learning from these genetic studies is that all of us with those MTHFR genes are not good at getting rid of toxins that we're being exposed to in our client, or in our culture, in the water, in the atmosphere, in our soils. But we can't walk around being paranoid about everything either. The trick is to utilize traditional foods to help people activate their cells in a positive manner to help get rid of these toxins that we're building up in our system. Our food is very much a cornerstone of our identity. When I talk with clients, I find I want to know about their life, what's going on in their life, and where they might be sabotaging their diet with activities that they're doing and not even thinking about. I mean, it's synonymous for us to think about hot dogs and popcorn either at the ball game or at the movie theater. Yet we don't think about, we're not aware of how portion sizes have hugely gone up over the last 25 years in particular, about how many chemicals are in those foods. And movie theaters, for example, discourage people from bringing in their own food because they want you to buy there. So we talk to our clients about healthier options, that if they're going to be watching the game, doing a tailgater party, about getting good quality frankfurters and having good quality fruits and vegetables, or good quality chips at those events, so that they're still participating and not feeling like they're being deprived of part of the social activity of what's going on with their friends through having to eat only what they perceive as healthy foods. There are lots of traditional foods for us that can be healthy when we eat them in the right way, and we get a lot of the chemical crap out of them. Our food has tremendous importance. So that's one of the things we need to honor as well for people with religious beliefs. Look, the role of food is enormous there. There are tremendous cultural food recipes and traditions involved with almost every religion. And as holistic nutritionists, I think it's really important for us to honor those and to encourage people in using those traditional foods in that kind of manner, because we know that when food is made out of real ingredients, people don't eat anywhere near as much, and when they're engaged in social activity, there's a lot of conversation that goes on that automatically slows down the eating process. So that may be one of the reasons why in Europe it takes so bloody long for people to get through dinner compared to those of us on the West Coast that might be gulping our food. Sorry, Andrea, I couldn't help it. I threw out that bloody there. I've been around too many Canadians lately. So one of the things that really concerns me about this is what I hear through research and hear from my students that are millennial students. There was a Seattle Times article came out last year that was talking about the millennial trend for food and how eating a bowl of cereal and putting the bowl in the sink to be cleaned up later was perceived as being just too much of a hassle by some millennials. Now, this isn't all millennials, because we know from our experience with NANP that there are millennials who are very dedicated to fermenting and farming and permaculture and agriculture. But as clinicians, we need to be aware what the trends are with the millennial group as well. So scientific research and studies right now are showing us that this particular group of individuals are less likely to cook than any other previous generation. And part of that may be because nobody's teaching them how to shop, how to plan meals, and how to prepare foods that are nutritious for them. It's much easier to pull by a fast food restaurant that caters to organics, vegetarian, and paleo type meal plans than to actually have to learn on their own because of being afraid of making a mistake, not having a lot of money in their budget to make mistakes on food. So that's where we come in as incredibly important in the role of education for the population also, is because we have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have the ability to pass forward traditional cooking methods and old recipes that not only save our clients money, but are far more nutritious. And an example of that I can give you is in the 1930s, Bisquick came about because of a man from General Mills being on a train to San Francisco. He wanted something to eat. He was starving. It was late at night. The railroad kitchen car was closed. The railroad kitchen travel was huge in the 1930s through 1970s. And the chef in the railroad car whipped up biscuits in a very short matter of time for this gentleman. That was the start of something all of us, including our clients, have probably grown up with in our kitchen cupboards, called Bisquick. Well, it wasn't a new thing that was developed by General Mills. It was a practical thing that many people, and especially parts of the western part of the United States, had as part of their kitchen. Because when you had a hungry logging crew showing up, or a hungry crew of people working in your fields, you had to be able to put forth a lot of food in a quick manner that was going to be nutritious. And so that all reminded me about my aunt and about my mother-in-law and about about my husband's grandmother. And I dug out my mother-in-law's recipe box, and sure enough, here was a recipe for making your own baking mix. So I looked through it, I got the ingredients, and the next thing we knew, we had a gallon jar of gluten-free baking mix made with real fats like butter or lard or coconut oil and flours that we could eat. And so now in less than 10 minutes, basically 2 minutes to mix together and 12 minutes to cook, my husband can have 2 or 3 buttermilk biscuits to go with his breakfast that are gluten-free, and they're very easy for him to prepare. That's the kinds of things that if we know that, we can pass that knowledge on to the millennial generation and help them get away from so many bagged, boxed, canned, bottled foods that are out there that are going to continue to compromise their cellular health and integrity. So let's take a little bit of a micro look into some of the history of food exploration, traditional preparation, and then I'm going to go into the science. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on history, even though I probably could easily for 2-3 hours, as my students will tell you. But we're going to look at this. So these pictures I'll go through these quickly. So seed saving has been something that's been going on forever. In the 18th century, people were sent forth to collect seeds to bring back because every country's economy was dependent on domestic food production. Now, we're not in that situation any longer. We have globalization. We can get food from practically anywhere in the world overnight. And there is a push for us to go back towards domestic food production, but the price for that is going to be increases in food. So when we're talking to our clients about buying locally through farmers markets, and they say, but it costs so much more, then know in your own mind that that's a result of domestic food production always being more expensive than when we do global food acquisition, because a merchant can spread that cost of marketing the food out over a far greater source of people. So we've been looking at the science of food for a long time, and there is a tremendous amount of information out there that it's just been forgotten. It's gotten lost in archives, and it's gotten lost in libraries. But one of the important aspects of this is that we are losing 12,000 years of very important food history because we are so involved with such a small section of the food that's being produced now. So we've lost thousands of traditional foods. We aren't encouraging people to cook traditional foods. In the 1800s, we had food explorers. This gentleman here, Frank N. Myers and P.H. Dorset, they first coined the phrase of agricultural explorers, and they went forth and went to countries all over the world. They were sent by the governments of their country, by the government of our country, to travel all over the world and collect seeds that could be brought back to the United States or to Great Britain to make agricultural crops, to increase our food sustainability and our food sources that were available for our population. Now we're depending on countries like Monsanto and Cargill. This is a picture of a woman in Korea who is grinding soybeans. This was a traditional way of grinding it after they had been fermented. These food explorers brought this information back. But from this, we need to let our clients know that this kind of soy product is incredibly different from the soy that's being manufactured, grown, and provided for us in the United States today. So there's science here to show this to our clients. It's not just our opinions. The Hatch Act of 1887 was designed to sow the seeds of creativity in every state. So the FDA launched this Hatch Act, and they developed research stations and grant stations, and they gave away tons and tons of seeds for individuals to plant. And in the 1930s, that's predominantly why many portions of the United States didn't starve to death, is because of the free seeds that were given out by the USDA and the farm bureaus at that time. So that's why we have some of the crops in the Pacific Northwest that we have, and why we have some of the crops in California that we have, is through the efforts of the government at that point in time to help keep people from starving to death. So while today we have an abundance of food, we have a deficiency in nutrients because of what's been going on. So there's a price we pay for everything. And while this was very effective at helping people to get ranches and farms and agricultural bursting forth in our country, what no one was looking at, what nobody knew about, were the consequences of the pollution that would take effect, and how those chemicals would be impacting our life as we got into the 21st century. Because many of these chemicals are 40 years before we find the cellular response from them. This is very much the situation for people who were exposed to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. It took over 45 years for the Veterans Administration, for researchers to see what was happening to the endocrinological systems of the endocrine systems of our veterans that were exposed to Agent Orange. So it's not just the veterans we have to keep in mind. Now we have not only glycophosphate, but we have Roundup, for example, being applied to lots of different things. And as we move farther into the 21st century, where people are now having available to them products like cannabis for either recreational or medical uses, I always ask my clients if they're growing for themselves or if they're purchasing it, because it is routine for people to apply chemicals such as Raid to that herb before selling it to keep the bugs down. Well, how many of my clients' health challenges might be worsened because of those chemical exposures? Innovation really grabbed our country in the 1940s and 50s, and we went from having very few processed commercial foods in some parts of the world to an abundance of them. And part of that came about because of an engaging, vivacious woman named Peg Bracken, who wrote a book called I Hate to Cook book. And this was done in the 1960s, and in a matter of 6 months, her book had sold over 10,000 copies into the average homes. I have lost track of how many clients have told me when they see it on my shelf here at the office that they say, oh, my mom had that cookbook, or I remember seeing that cookbook at my grandmother's house. Peg Bracken's whole premise in her cookbook was about making food as fast, as easy, as convenient as possible, with as little muss or fuss, and as much as possible, the ingredients should come out of tins and boxes. This was a major launching point for many of our commercial foods that are being used by our clients or might have been part of their life. The hamburger helper, the Cheese Whiz, the macaroni products, the soup products. While Campbell's Soup has been around for a very long time, many of their products really took off after World War II and launched even faster into the marketplace in the 1960s. So this is an example of a traditional sheep herder's wagon from the 1800s and 1900s up until the 1970s, actually, in many parts of the western United States. This is at a location in Shaniko, Oregon. I remember seeing people pulling these with horses or with their wagons. These were the first camp trailers in many parts. And what I learned from these people as a kid as many of them were Basque, many of them were Irish. They came straight over from those countries, and they had an incredibly rich, flavorful, wonderful one-pot meals that they made. The Basque are world-renowned for their recipes and for their cooking, and it is such an important part of their tradition that they have brought it with them everywhere, and they tightly hang on to it and keep the tradition going. And it's loaded with nutrient-dense foods that help people to stay healthy. We also saw this with the Irish sheep herders that came over when I was a kid, of making traditional foods. And we think of the Irish as eating predominantly potatoes, but they have a very rich history of wild asparagus, of collard greens, of sloe, which is a wild plum, of blackberries and watercress. All of these foods were their average everyday foods, as well as wild game. Then potatoes came to Great Britain, and in literally 25 years, an entire population of people forgot how to harvest and utilize their wild foods that they had been eating for a millennia. And when you look back at the historical accounts of what happened in Ireland, there are multiple times where you will read, if the Irish had remembered their native foods, the famines would not have been so devastating. And I think we have to take that into account when we're looking at what's happening with Americans' monoculture of food today, that when we lose this very important historical information about using not only wild foods but traditional foods, we're cutting our nutrient availability down to a smaller and smaller and smaller circle of foods that aren't going to be capable of sustaining our health, of supporting our DNA. We used to teach, there was a 4-H is big when I was growing up. And this is a young man in the 1930s in Portland who was part of a 4-H group, cooking beautiful rolls. I encourage clients to get involved with 4-H, to either get their kids involved or become involved as 4-H leaders themselves, because this is a perfect opportunity for us as educators to step in and help people learn how to cook again. Many of you might think that the picture of the little boy and the woman is from the turn of the century. That's actually 1957. So those are, people who are our parents. They might even be in our own generation. We're cooking real foods in many parts of the country before we got so roped into the commercialization, the magazines that change things. One of the major changes that's happened with our food is the production is much less labor intensive now. We have machinery that do work that thousands of people used to do by hand before, and this is 2 gentlemen harvesting cranberries. Food safety is always an important issue for us, but it is not a new issue for us. Upton Sinclair wrote about what was happening in the meatpacking industry back in 1906. We know that cocaine was a regular part of Coca-Cola back in this day and age. And one of my most favorite ones is crimes against butter. These 2 gentlemen went to Leavenworth Prison for their crimes against butter in 1886 and 1915. And what's fascinating to me about this is that this all happened because of margarine. And when I looked at this information in the National Archives, I saw that margarine was invented back in 1870s during the Napoleonic Wars. And it created such a fervor by American dairy farmers that they went to Congress and demanded that there be sanctions against imitation butter, because they were losing their market share. It was too cheap. And it wasn't been of all that great a quality back then either. But by 1950, for most of us, that's something that's within one generation for us. 1950, is when all of those federal taxes and regulations about margarine were rescinded. So that explains why we went from 1950 forward with all of a sudden there being a an abundance of margarine products. When before we can say, but mom always cooked with butter, or grandma always cooked with butter. These are children in 1930 at Christmas time, and when I give presentations at a historical society, I pointed out to them something that is hard for people of that older generation to believe. And in my mind, looking at this, boiled turnips, homemade bread, knowing that the flour was not hugely adulterated in the time, they were eating turnips and cabbages, that these poor little, very poor children of the Depression were probably getting better nutrition than many of our inner city kids are today because of all of the processed foods that are part of their diets today. So, you know, I've had older people say, no, we were starving to death. And then I've also had many clients tell me that we were dirt poor during the Depression, but we had a garden and we never went hungry. And that creates sustainability. It creates food security. And part of the role for us as holistic nutritionists is to help people gain food security. So the RDA came out 75 years ago. It only included 9 essential nutrients: protein, iron, calcium, vitamin A. This is very different from what we know today. This is just an illustration for you on how rapidly the science of nutrition has changed, how much information we know now that was not known such a short period of time ago. And it's also why we meet resistance when we talk about food as being such a healing, healing ingredient in the equation of our lives. So in 1943, they published this because they were concerned about not only people coming out of the Depression being nutrient deficient, but also because of people heading off to war. So this came about because of World War II. 90% of the food science industry began because of the result of World War II. And so we've gone from the basic 7 guide up to what we have today. But what all of us need to remember when we're talking to clients is that many of the foods that were recommended as being healthful, that we talk to them about being healthful, are not covered by SNAP or WIC or food support programs that are federally funded or state funded. And this was a big eye-opener for nurses when I talked with them about this in October, is because in Oregon, if it's listed as organic, food stamps won't pay for it. It'll pay for sugar-loaded peanut butter, but it won't pay for natural peanut butter. It will pay for frozen vegetables in small bags, but it won't pay for organic frozen vegetables. So whatever state you're in that you're listening to this through, I encourage you to go look at what the SNAP program, the WIC program for your states, what their lists are, what they will and won't pay for. Because as clinicians, if you're recommending to your clients that they buy foods that aren't paid for by these programs and they're low income clients, then you're not going to get real good compliance with it because they have to feed a family. So, and part of what will bring about change is as we educate people more about the value of the food and how these federally funded programs aren't paying for these foods, then there again, we can start making a change in what's available to our people. Because I truly believe the historical evidence is overwhelming when we look at how food has been used to subjugate people for eons, starvation, famine, and various other things. So our first supermarket appeared in 1946. Before this, we were talking small markets, and we're going back into small markets now. There is a huge opportunity for us as clinicians, as holistic nutritionists, as well as for our clients to be movers and shakers in the new food industry, where we're going back to artisan European style markets. And that creates community. It creates a support system for our population, as well as a security. And you know, many of our older people, it's so important for them to be able to have some social interaction. And sometimes taking grandma to the farmer's market might be her big deal for the week, and to be able to look at produce and pick out things. And then the next thing you know, she might be sharing stories. So that this can be a very useful tool for helping to learn about times gone by and food traditions that we might have lost. So calories and quality do not equate into health. And this is a major difference between how we view things and how a dietitian might view things. We understand that it's the quality of the food that brings about health. And the paradigm, the medical paradigm, the nutrition paradigm, all being linked to calories and macro and micronutrients, it's going to be up to us to bring about this paradigm shift in thoughts. And I always reflect back on what Liz Lipsky said at the 2015 NANP conference. She said it takes 4 generations for us to damage the DNA. And it takes 4 more generations for us to repair the DNA. Now, when I think about this, it just brings shivers to me, because I look at my family, at the people around me, and you can so clearly see the huge spikes in chronic illnesses such as diabetes, obesity, autoimmune diseases, inflammatory illnesses, and how those have significantly increased from over the last 4 generations. And it's those 4 generations, when we look back, where processed foods have become more and more and more a part of our diet. Everything is about perspective. And part of what we do as educators is help people to change their perspective. And we're going to start using science, because people are very snooty about science. You know, is that supported? Is there scientific support for that? Is this evidence-based? And, you know, we don't have this system like Europe has with Commission G, where we honor tradition, we look at common uses, and we value how people have been using something safe and efficaciously for decades or centuries. We have to, you know, to kind of reinvent the wheel. So here's an example of reinventing the wheel. Research shows us that potatoes, tomatoes, and basically iceberg lettuce are considered the top most popular and consumed vegetables in America. And even though tomatoes are a fruit, not a vegetable, they were listed as the popular vegetable. What they aren't telling you in this information is that the form of tomatoes they're talking about is almost exclusively ketchup and tomato sauce, not whole tomatoes. So, you know, that tells you we're really not getting even these 3 forms of vegetables. California, since we're getting ready to head to Monterey in a few weeks, and we're heading to the vegetable and fruit basket of the world in so many respects, they're responsible for 80% of the United States broccoli and acreage is grown there. California also produces over 75% of the spinach that's consumed in the United States, and 75% of the tomatoes. 95% of those tomatoes are used made into ketchup and into tomato sauces. So, you know, it's an incredibly agriculturally rich area, but it's also, unfortunately, California has a tremendous amount of chemicals being used on the crops. And our organic crops are exposed to those chemicals through groundwater pollution. And part of my goal, my mission, one of the things I talk about with people is encouraging them to do small container gardens if they don't have a yard, or a few planter boxes, because food security is a real challenge for people on low incomes. And if we teach people, like they did in the 30s, how to grow their own food, then our population will become healthier once again. So perspective, this is an ad from 1963, the year I was born. I think it's wonderful. They were worried about women being too skinny back then, and there were products that you could buy so that you actually put weight on. This is just one small example of how perception has changed, how we view the human body much differently with each generation. And we've gone from the Twiggy model of the 70s and the 80s now to where we're wanting, the millennial generation wants people to be thin, and they want them to look fit, muscle definition. Something that I can remember young women in the 80s would stop exercising because they thought they were looking fat because their calves were getting too big from walking. So perception, talk to your clients about their body perception. Recognize that their age is going to affect how they think about weight, for example. And so now let's look at some of the science. Scientific studies resulting on just whole foods. I did a Google search. We all do Google searches nowadays, even though we have thousands of books. So when I typed in scientific study results for whole foods health benefits, it yielded 5,370,000 results. So when people say what we talk about with food is not supported by science, it's because they're not looking, and because we're not saying, oh yes it is. So these were just on the top 2 pages. I only looked into 2 pages of the Google search, and I found studies that had to do with fruits and vegetables, with whole grains, with broccoli, plant-based research and stories. So as you can see from this, there is tremendous science to support what we're doing. And it doesn't just involve the food itself. There were even 2 articles in the first 2 pages that had to do with business. And I encourage all of you to look at the business side of food, because it is a huge ripple effect. And unintended consequences are always create a ripple effect that affect more than just the food that we're eating. Or it's the reverse. Our food is affected because of the ripple effect that was done by a business decision for a major corporation. So as clinicians, we need to understand that business is very much a part of food. And it looks like we're coming up on an end. So watercress in favor of the Irish here. Irish monks back in the earliest written documentation show that Irish monks survived on nothing but watercress and bread for long periods of time. Watercress is a big thing. Watercress sandwiches in Great Britain. Watercress grows wild in many of the areas around Great Britain, and I'm sure Andrea can talk to us about that at some point. But watercress is an incredibly rich source of vitamin C. It was first studied and used because of how it helped people keep from getting scurvy. When I did a study, a search for research articles in regards to watercress, this was what I found on the first page. And now we're seeing watercress has scientific studies behind it in improving cancer outcomes, and supplementing the diet for improving DNA damage. So for people who are looking at improving their DNA, I'm of Irish ancestry, I'm going to eat my watercress. Don't want DNA damage, thank you very much. How to turn off breast cancer with eating watercress. Watercress is also mentioned in Life Extension Foundation's magazine, which I like their articles because they have tons of research to support what they're saying. So watercress is a traditional food used by many people of Northern European ancestry that has benefits for helping us to prevent cancer, one of the things many of our clients may be dealing with or afraid of. And this is science-based. Pomegranate is another one. We've all heard about pomegranate at our NANP conferences. The pomegranate tree was brought to California in 1769 by the Spaniards. Pomegranate has always been viewed as an aphrodisiac and a fertility food. And when we look at the chemical makeup of this food, we see it's because it is so nutrient packed. There are so many antioxidants. There are so many minerals. There are so much vitamin C. All of those things that are necessary for healthy sperm mobility and fertility are present in this food. So there again, this was just on the first page of Google searches. And when I narrowed the search down to being specific about only scientific research on this topic, there were over 533 research study results available to us. So this is science-based. We're encouraging our clients to eat real food based on science. We're not just making will-o'-the-wisp recommendations because we think it's cool and trendy to be going back to eating pioneer style. Buckwheat has been in the news. It's an important food. It came with the Greeks to Russia and Ukraine and the Balkans and Finland. And when these people immigrated to the United States, they brought buckwheat with them. We may or may not be talking to our celiac clients, our gluten-sensitive clients about the use of buckwheat. There again, buckwheat is considered a functional food. It is one of the few that have got scientific studies showing it as a functional food and how it positively impacts our health. It is being used in genetic studies and how it positively benefits our genes. It is also being looked at in cancer studies, and some of the most important studies and uses for us is how buckwheat can help with the prevention or the beneficial management of diabetes. There again, all science based. It's supporting what we're doing with traditional foods and why it's so important for us to know the ethnic backgrounds of our clients, because through that we can help customize their food, their bio-individual meals that you might be planning or talking to them about without even having to do a DNA test on them. We already have the knowledge. We just have forgotten how to tap into it. And I want to really encourage all of you to consider how traditional foods are based in science and how that science is just supporting everything that our ancestors knew, and how we can make such a big difference in our clients' health by just getting them to go back to eating some of the foods that are genetically appropriate for them. So as Andrea mentioned at the beginning, the second edition of my book is coming out at the conference. And so I'm not presenting this year, but I always take great pride in releasing my books to the NANP family first. So I wanted to let you know that this will be there. This book versus this now has over 400 scientific and historical references in it. And so I'm very proud of this second edition and how you will be able to use this to help your clients. So it is now 12 o'clock. Andrea.
Yes.
It's up to you, my dear.
Well, that was awesome, Tamara. Thank you so much. I certainly learned a lot. I made a few notes. You mentioned a few things that obviously I don't come from the US. I'm from the UK. So I might have a few questions for you. And we are out of time. But if anyone has any questions for you, can they reach you in any way?
They can email me directly. They can also ping me through the NANP member clicks. I'm there, so they can contact me through our social networking stuff on the NANP site. They can email me through my website, yourwholenutrition.com, and then they can tag me at the conference. I will be footloose and fancy free and available to talk with people as much as they want to talk at the conference this year.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tamara. All right, everybody. So that concludes our conversation for today. Now, next month, we will be joined by Mira Dissy. She will be talking about ingredients and inflammation, understanding the silent contributors to gut dysfunction and digestive impairment. So please mark your calendars for Thursday, April 12, and plan on joining us for another great presentation. Thanks for being on this call today and have a great rest of your day.